A doomer really is someone who believes honesty in describing our effect on the environment is more useful than hope built on denial. We survived not because we were fearless,
Mhm.
but because we were afraid. But nature doesn't care about glamour. It only rewards what works. The more success you have, the more environmental resources that you use up. As scientists have a tendency to want to impress their colleagues, 97% that's already been impacted by humans, we're doing a huge disservice to the planet, to everything else by not making science understandable. It wasn't me that suffered, it was the ecosystems and the species that we couldn't justify stopping a project that we knew innately was going to be incredibly harmful. The best thing we can do for the environment in terms of climate change right now is stop destroying old growth forests. We rely on fossil fuels for our everyday life. But if we stop using fossil fuels, we're in trouble.
So, hello everyone. Welcome to Science Talk, another episode. I'm your host, Dr. Muhammad Ittifaq. In this episode, I'm joined by Lyle Lewis. He's a former endangered species biologist and author of Racing to Extinction: Why Humanity Will Soon Vanish. Lyle, welcome to Science Talk.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you. So, first, a big question I'm gonna ask you what are some of the common or big misconceptions about your book, Racing to Extinction: Why Humanity Will Soon Vanish?
I'm not sure there's as many misconceptions as just the title itself completely has people running for cover.
Mhm.
And it kind of brings me back to the conversation you had with Elliot Jacobson a
Mhm.
couple of weeks ago
Yeah.
about doomers and
Yes.
and how they're perceived.
Mhm.
And of course, anybody that looks at the title of my book would immediately qualify me as a doomer.
Mhm.
And yet, uh, I don't really consider myself a doomer.
Mhm.
I actually think doomer is an insult that people, it's just convenient insult that people throw at others who are unwilling to lie about the limits of the environment. And it's a word that people use to dismiss people who describe the world as it is, not as they wish it to be. I kind of recognized that we were heading for the cliff, you know, about 2014 or 2015. And I didn't even start writing my book until 2019. And I didn't make my first foray into social media until about 2021 or 2022.
During
And it
COVID.
wasn't and it wasn't until then that I learned that I was a doomer. I
Hmm.
always just considered myself, this is the environmental reality that we're operating under. But on social media, I'm characterized as that as all the time.
Mhm.
And it's basically a doomer really is someone who believes honesty in describing our effect on the environment is more useful than hope built on denial. Doomer is just a insult for anyone who refuses to believe in endless growth, especially on a planet that we've almost used up. And it's meant to marginalize, not describe. And throughout my career, trying to advocate for the environment, I've always been marginalized by people that are more interested in making money off the environment than they are conserving what remains. I consider people like Jim Jones of Guyana Massacre, he was a doomer. A lot of the people that believe in Armageddon and welcome collapse as those are the kind of people I always thought of as doomers and still do. And so, being an environmental realist, I accept four truths that most people, kind of ignore. And the first one is the most basic one. And even, some of the smartest people on the planet seem to just completely overlook. And that's we live on a finite planet. I mean, we can look at a picture of Earth from space and everybody would agree that it's finite,
Yeah.
but that's not how we treat it. And, it's like every barrel of oil we use, every breath of air we breathe, everything comes from a finite planet. And with 8.2 billion people, we're quickly using a lot of it up, or the toxins that we're creating are making it uninhabitable. The second thing that I think doomers recognize is that there's biological thresholds that exist and whether it's for forests, for grasslands, for wetlands, for individuals, for even for civilizations, everything has a breaking point. We're not special because we can talk about ours.
Yeah.
We're special because we keep pretending it doesn't exist. And you can already see it happening. People are getting sick, even dying from microplastics. I
Yeah.
mean, at this point in time, we've all got microplastics in our tissues, and there's new research that shows that people are increasing prevalence of strokes and all kinds of maladies from microplastics and nanoplastics.
Mhm.
But what we're seeing now is only the beginning. The plastic that's already fragmented into microscopic pieces is just a fraction of what lies ahead. I mean, there's billions of tons of discarded material slowly breaking down, turning our planet's surface into like a synthetic sediment layer. And so we're only experiencing the tip of the iceberg. And for some, those biological thresholds have already been exceeded. I mean, they're the ones that have already either died or are sick as a result of ingesting microplastics. But our species is set to experience a biological threshold just from microplastics. And it doesn't even account for what's coming alongside. You're really focused on climate change and the rising temperatures, but that's a biological stressor. But so is infectious diseases and the growing storm of synthetic chemicals, the slow erosion of food quality as a result of our soils losing fertility and life. And each of those pressures alone would stress our biological limits. But together, you know, it's really kind of ominous if the more you know about how all these things interact. The third thing that I really kind of push back on doomers is human behavior kind of decides our timeline. And, you've joined social media and have seen kind of the denial. And, anybody that's even dealing just with climate alone has seen the amount of denial that comes from people that just push back on, that climate change is real and it's a thing. We just can't bring ourselves to imagine how catastrophic things can be. I mean, we all want to put a soft focus, everything will be okay in the end. And that kind of leads to the last thing I think that doomers, what's categorized as doomers, kind of portray is they recognize that human exceptionalism blinds us. We believe extinction is only for other species and that we're somehow immune, somehow chosen, biologically and morally superior. And the thing that I see on social media all the time is that 99.9% of all species that have ever lived are extinct. I mean, the deniers of the sixth mass extinction, it's almost like the planet is greening for climate change. Well, that's their favorite talking point in denying that we're in a sixth mass extinction. And so but they use it as trivia, not prophecy. And it's the number we use to rationalize every loss, every vanished bird, every bleached reef. Yet when someone suggests we might join that list, it's simply unthinkable. It can't happen to us. We have an extinction exemption. And so that's what exceptionalism looks like, the conviction that nature's rules don't apply to humans.
Humans. Yeah, I think you said a lot in the first question about the misconception or overall and about doomers. But what I would say is, like each individual who are the experts, either you're evolutionary biologist or people who are coming from hardcore environmental sciences background or climate modeling perspective, it does shape philosophically, intellectually where they are coming from and what they have experienced over the last few decades based on their work. I honestly, personally do not discount, and I think it's insult to anybody to discount their experience and not to, kind of honor or acknowledge their experience, and that is legitimate. And that shapes their reality, and maybe that's one of the realities and one of the truths we are having, and there are more than one truth in the world we live in, especially when we talk about, overconsumption, overproduction, and over utilization of the things which pollute our environment and causing so much damage and harm to a lot of species, not only to us, but in the ocean, in the dry lands, in the wetlands, and in the forests. So there's a lot of things, but so one thing I want to clarify that you do not call yourself any of the version of doomerism. You are like kind of more into looking at the species other than humans, and you're more interested, and you have done a lot of work over the last many years with the government or without government, spending time in the nature, studying, observing, experiencing those things, which is unique. And I think not everybody is privileged or can afford to spend that much time in the nature. So one thing I would just want out of that conversation is that you do not portray or like kind of claim yourself as any version of the doomerism, and maybe there are different versions of doomerism, as Professor Jacob said, and I respect his version of doomerism. And then there's other people, who are population doomers or religious doomer, AI doomers, or even climate or within climate doomers. There are different versions of that. So you do not self-proclaim any of those versions, and you kind of, because I don't want to that have conversation where she like, oh, somebody's, like kind of attacking other person, like, downplaying their experience or their philosophical or intellectual points where they are coming from, because I have like kind of respect for each one of them, other than of course people who straight out deny climate change. It's hard to, it's very hard to find a commonalities to have conversations with them, and you engage with them all the time on social media. Like I respect that, and I think that's great. Somebody has to stand up, stand for that. But a lot of people don't find it, very encouraging or useful to interact or engage with those conversations on social media, since it's a very polarized issue at the end.
Let me say one thing is I have the utmost respect for Elliot Jacobson. I mean, he exemplifies a couple of things that I find incredibly admirable. And the first one is that he portrays data in real time.
Yeah.
And that is something that when we rely on science, I
Mhm.
mean, you probably know it as well as anyone. By the time you massage your data and do all the statistical analysis and get it wrote up and then get it peer reviewed and then get it published. By the time that process happens, this things are changing so quickly
Yes,
that a lot of times it's irrelevant by the time it finally gets published.
absolutely.
And
Yep.
to have him publishing data in real time is so useful for whether it's researchers or just the average everyday person. And I think it's somewhat ironic that someone that has dealt with gambling and statistics and the odds of gambling and all of
And
those kinds
probabilities, yes.
of is uh, is helping us understand how we're gambling with the planet. I mean, there's a lot of irony there in terms of what he's his background versus what he's portraying. So, I think he's a wonderful asset
Yeah,
to
he is definitely.
environmentalism and climate change in general. So I don't want to give the impression that I
Yeah,
am.
yeah, absolutely. That's why I just wanted to, have that clarify that in the beginning. So yeah, no, thank you. So So you said in one of the blog, and I think it was audio, maybe it was a written response, that you said during your that's a quote, during my career I have fought individual battles, usually for species or ecosystems, and so I was always really focused on particular environmental conflict that I was dealing with at the time, unquote, end quote. So, can you talk a little bit about that if you remember that quote from, an interview or like along those lines?
Uh, yeah, I mean that was a recurring theme throughout my entire career, and when you're working, you really do have a kind of a focus, and it's not like I've always understood things like I do now.
Yeah, of course.
We all learn as we go, and
Yes.
when I first graduated from college, I mean, I come from a family with a ranching and logging background, and so I thought they were fine. I thought everything was fine in terms of the grazing and logging and everything that was going on. And it wasn't until I got out in the field but I just kept an open mind, which some people, are incapable of doing. They always kind of romanticize the past.
Mhm.
And what I found was that, a lot of the grazing and logging and that was going on was actually resulting in irreparable harm to the environment. And so, one of the first real controversial things I was involved in is what's called riparian areas, the green areas along streams and springs and wetlands and anything that's kind of water influenced,
Mhm.
especially in dryland habitats. And they're back in the late 70s, people were starting to recognize how important those areas were for biodiversity. I mean, there's all kinds of plants and birds and animals and amphibians and everything that are completely reliant on those. And yet, livestock in the West has destroyed or um, certainly they're greatly deteriorated because of livestock grazing. And so I was trying to reverse that. And that was during a Republican administration, the Reagan administration. And uh, it was nearly impossible to do. And so in being an advocate for trying to conserve those areas, I was under constant attack, not only from ranchers, but also within the agency, but also from academics who a lot of time get research funding from the very industry.
Yes.
They're basically supported by livestock industry, and so they're very supportive of those and somewhat blinded to the ramifications, especially when when it's a kind of a new concept uh, that's just kind of they've become so entrenched in their views that they just can't see anything else.
So you said like you the title of your book, is just kind of people pay attention to that, and of course there's like thousands and thousands of videos on if you write one word that's extinction, right? And then like people just kind of outrightly see that as a big word. Um, and I think there was one conversation on Reddit, like, okay, maybe, or somebody else said, like, oh, some people say that if you're, have some mental health issues or things, maybe you shouldn't be talking or you shouldn't be thinking along these lines. There's a risk there, how you will feel. And I want to get into, the word extinction because there are two timelines. The timelines we humans can calculate and observe, and there's nature's timeline, right? We have days and years which are short, right? We have the natural cycle and we design those, and there's a natural cycle which coming from this universe, a force, whatever you believe in or you don't believe in, is that like when we talk about extinction, like if we say like, oh, it's gonna happen in 2050 or 2100 or like timestamp on it, that's maybe our timeline, which one we can calculate or we can, like kind of observe. But naturally, it may be 100 year for us, but like for the nature for whole universe, it may be like a few seconds, like when you see the timeline there. So can you explain a little bit about the concept of extinction? Like, why is it like, because normally it's like negative connotation, everything is gonna disappear, or it's just like within a short period of time and whatever we can comprehend as humans in terms of timeline.
Well, I mean that's a very complex topic because what I mean we have a way of rationalizing
Yes.
timelines to
Mhm.
make ourselves feel meaningful,
Absolutely.
and we all do,
Mhm.
and we all want to think that our work is important and that we're doing what we're doing is a
Yes.
good thing, and
Yes.
yet even those people, I mean, the memory last maybe 40, 60 years after a person's gone, and then they're forgotten. And I have no doubt that my great grandparents and my great great grandparents, thought the same way that, they tried to make their life meaningful and did what they can, but they're long forgotten. I mean, I don't even know my great grandparents' names, let alone, what they did or where they came from. And, there's some people that look back in, a couple hundred years, but I mean, look at even presidents. I mean, few people know who the fourth president was, and yet, he was the most important person in the United States at that point in time. And so our ability to forget the past is somewhat, it's a way for us to feel good about ourselves.
Yes.
And and so the farther back in history we go,
Mhm.
the more we try to forget it. And that's kind of the fascinating thing about evolutionary ecology that I found, working in it the last 15, 20 years is that, it really is a fascinating topic just
Yes.
to understand where we came from.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of truth to the old adage that, if you know where you've been, you have a much better idea to know where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that we have a tendency to do is we're experts at self-deception.
Mhm.
Um, and how we perceive ourselves as humans. It kind of is an offshoot of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We tell stories that make us sound noble. That we were the clever tool maker, the heroic hunter, the wise steward of nature. But the truth is, we're just not very good at accepting ourselves for who we are. We reconstruct the past by picking up little pieces and putting them back together in whatever way feels good.
Mhm.
And it's how memory works. And we remember what flatters us and forget what doesn't.
Mhm.
And psychologists call it retrieval induced forgetting,
Mhm.
the tendency to reinforce pleasant stories until they become the only stories we can recall. And over time, nostalgia takes over. We start with the assumption that things were better in the past, and then we build the evidence to prove it.
Yeah.
And so it's emotionally adaptive. And so we love to romanticize our ancestors.
Mhm.
We picture them living in harmony with nature, and they were wise and balanced and peaceful in a way we've somehow lost.
Mhm.
And it's comforting, but it's completely wrong.
Yeah.
Ancient people were people. They quarreled, overhunted, overfished, and adapted just like we do,
Yeah.
sometimes brilliantly, but sometimes disastrously.
Yeah.
Their knowledge wasn't frozen in time. We avoid the truth that we've always been complicated. The real human story is that cleaner, simpler, and morally superior. And we even re engineer our evolutionary past. We call ourselves hunters, noble predators, apex strategists, when in reality, our only success came as scavengers and opportunists. We love to picture ourselves as eagles, not buzzards. But nature doesn't care about glamour. It only rewards what works. And what worked for us and what still works is cooperation born from vulnerability. We survived not because we were fearless,
Mhm.
but because we were afraid. We learned to think together to outwit predators that saw us as food. That's the part of human history we still can't admit, that we evolved as prey. And our our sociality, our empathy, even our intelligence came from fear, not dominion. But fear doesn't fit the story very well. And so we rearrange the facts to and romanticize our past. And that's how we manage the present.
Mhm.
It helps us cope with guilt and softens the edges of history and gives us a way to keep believing in ourselves. But there is a cost to doing that. And when we idealize our ancestors, we erase them. We turn real people with real complexity into symbols. And in doing so, we lose the ability to see ourselves clearly. And we like to think we've evolved beyond myth, but myth is how we organize memory.
That's so there's a lot of what you just said. And I'm gonna like, because this is like very, there's a lot of points which philosophically could be argued or could be, challenged, or like we can think of those things, of course, differently. But as I agree that as humans, we tell stories which make us more comfortable, right? And we like those stories, and we think ourselves as, the best thing ever happened to this planet. But on the other hand, we, as a species, humans, we have destroyed the environment and the ecosystem, and we have, used it so much in a many different ways. And that's why we are having this conversation today to talk about it. But I also want to get a little bit to discuss that the extinction is inevitable, or the timeline we put on it, because you said that, I think one of the things you have said in the past is that um, the sixth mass extinction didn't even start with industrial revolution. It may have gone back to 2.5 million years. How we think and how we do things as a function to our species, but how this this concept, as extinction, we think as inevitable, because then a lot of people, again, it's like a very negative connotation which has no hope. But on the other hand, you also have said in the past, like, yeah, we are deteriorating, and it doesn't mean we just sit tight and like you wait for it to happen, but we do something about it. And I use that analogy as like, you're diagnosed with cancer for now fourth stage of cancer, and it doesn't mean you just sit around and wait to die, but you fight for it to, survive. Or to live your life in a better way, as whatever the life has left, before you leave this planet or world. So like, what is what normally doomers or people like you talk more about extinction, that maybe it's inevitable, it's going to happen, but on the other hand, we can't just sit and wait to see things disappearing left and right. Or maybe we are, I mean, there is no question that we are not immune to that extinction. We're gonna leave, and people are dying because a lot of different reasons. So what is something where you see that as maybe a tension or a challenge and a hope, or maybe a things to do better, because you don't want to just live in a bunker and get drunk and like think about or wait for the extinction, but like to do something that our humans are really capable of doing. And one of the things is climate change, or in preserving the environment or ecosystem. What are the some of the things you have learned that we could do while this thing is going to happen? It's inevitable, it has its own timeline, or maybe we can predict some of the timelines, but there are things which we can make better.
What I've learned throughout my career is, at an individual level, we just can't change evolution. I mean, we were successful because we grew and adapted uh, and survived. And those evolutionary pressures, I mean, we've overcome the law of gravity with airlines and all that kind of thing, but we're helpless against evolutionary pressures to grow and survive. And you see it, you know, we're just doing it much better than we've ever done in the past. But we define success by how much of the environment that we can use. And there's an adage that I've heard my entire life, this kind of tongue in cheek and joking, that uh, he who dies with the most toys wins. But I mean, that is kind of true for how we view successful people in society. It's the people with yachts and, the billionaires. They're the most successful people. But the more success you have, the more environmental resources that you use up. And, people completely blame them for all of our problems. And there's certainly a big part of the problem. People that use that much of the environment are awful. I mean, I'd be the first to admit it.
No, like we're talking like what could be done, and you started the conversation from like individual level.
Oh,
Yeah, because like we normally like don't draw connection between becoming a billionaire or becoming rich, that how many Earth's resources you're using or consuming, and like putting a lot of lives in danger when you extract resources from this earth, and maybe and then like keep rising above, and people see you as a successful, but then they turn against you because it's not they turn against you because you have used resources, but they turn against you because their policies or the things they are supporting is hurting you. So they see that way, but they don't see it as like, oh, you're consuming more resources from this planet, which you shouldn't be, and that's why you're a terrible person. We don't think about them as like this. We just think about them, oh, you're a terrible person because you're supporting certain political candidate, or you're just using this, and on the other hand, myself just making the meets end, like I'm just living the life, paying the rent and doing the job, and like not I'm not doing anything, but I'm like seeing the impacts of these calamities or extreme weather, and those people are still being saved because they're rich and they can afford the insurance and things like that.
yeah. And when people ask me what they can do for the environment,
Yeah.
and everybody wants a solution, of course. And a lot of people, they think it's renewables or carbon capture or all those kinds of things. But the reality is the only thing that really makes any kind of a difference is to use less, if anything. Use less water, less oil and gas, turn the heat down a little bit in your home, maybe walk a little bit more. Anything that uses less
Yeah.
is something that helps the environment. And, you can be pretty creative about how you use less, and everybody has their own living environment, living situation. And, there's a lot of creativity in how you can potentially use less and help the environment. So that's something people can do. But it's unfortunate that because of how humanity defines success, those efforts are, quickly overwhelmed. But in my case, I do it anyway, just because we're only given the moment. And, if I can help do things now that, might save a bird or a bee or a native plant or whatever the case may be, to me, that's worth it.
Absolutely. And I don't think we should discount the individual efforts or little influence or impact you can have. And I think it's always encouraging, but it becomes a little bit, a conundrum when you see like only 15 or 20 or 30 companies are more responsible harming the environment than, 5 billion people as combined. Then it's like you start questioning your own thing, like, oh yeah, it's helping me, but like I'm not making much of a difference. And on the other hand, you see the pace of changing, it's so rapid, and your little action, not eating meat, or like going being a vegetarian, or spending time in the nature, or not driving a car, maybe it's like it's not as impactful. So I think that's the struggle where a lot of people the I think Professor Elliot Jacobson said, like, the tragedy of the commons, like like, oh, other people are not doing it, so what's my thing is gonna make a difference. But I think we still should continue doing those things. But like, speaking of this, like climate change, I don't know if you know Simon Clark. He's like a very famous YouTuber, do a lot of climate change stuff. Has hundreds of thousands of subscribers. He described it like the worst month. October was the worst month on climate change news because we have a lot of different reports coming out. Do you think like in 2025, I mean, like every time we're getting into something, we're like, this is the worst event, this is the worst year, this is the worst month. Is it becoming more of a norm that we just keep, labeling these things as using the word worst and that is being normalized and like people don't see it as the worst? Maybe it is, but still we don't see it. It just kind of lose its sensitivity, I think, these terms we use sometimes.
Yeah, I not only agree with that, but the term tipping points have been used so much
Yes.
that people, they just shrug when somebody says, we've crossed some tipping point.
Yes.
And it's it's just part of the psychology of being human.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I grew up on a ranch and I was around animals dying a lot. And I hate death. I mean, but when you're around it all the time, you become somewhat callous to
Yeah.
it. And it's kind of like a mental mechanism that allows you to enjoy life, or maybe enjoy is not the right term, but to uh, keep going. And when people hear those same terms over and over and over again, they become callous to them and it no longer means anything. And that's there's two things that I don't like what's going on in terms of the science, and one is doing that all the time. I mean, and journalists do the same thing. I mean, the number of times I've seen shocked in a headline that scientists are shocked or whatever is shocked by some new finding. It's been utilized. It's almost every other day type of thing. And so it's another case where people just become completely callous to reality. But the other thing is, and this is the other thing I try to do with social media, is scientists have a tendency to want to impress their colleagues. And, we go to conferences and, we talk about statistics, and we've got our graphs and all of these things. But we don't talk to the average person. And trying to make, I mean, we're doing a huge disservice to the planet, to everything else, by not making science understandable and usable to the basic person on the street. And so that makes it even easier to ignore all of these tipping points and all of the things that science and the media regularly uses. Is if you don't really understand what's going on and what the ramifications are and how it's going to affect you on a daily basis, it's easily to just move on and go about your daily business.
Yeah, and I think that that's true for so many things, credit cards or terms and conditions you agree to creating these accounts, and like, you don't understand how a lot of things work, but you just blindly agree to that, and then like, you don't like the consequences. But I think I totally agree. But there's another argument for that. I talked recently in one of the other episodes that like when we don't do the science in a way that is a more of a public outreach and public engagement and talking with other people who are not scientists, uh, so then when the scientists come under attack, they're not going to defend them because they don't understand. There's no connection. There's a disconnection between society and science at large. And I think there's a whole lot of reasons for that. And one of them is like, how the institutions are structured in the US or overall. We are used to like, like teach, do the research, present your findings, move on, right? There is no incentive doing that. I'm myself, I'm assistant professor. I'm doing research, I'm teaching. On top of that, like this effort, this outreach effort, like talking to experts, talking to people like you and a lot of others, is just to have a conversation and put it on, and that a lot of people are gonna see it and they're gonna like, get maybe educate them a little bit. but there's no incentive. It's not going to count toward my tenure. It's not going to give me promotion. It's not going to, like, look at the time and editing and all that stuff. But I'm doing it out of my own goodness in my heart, that I think it's like we need to do more. And I think over the years, it's becoming more apparent in the US or overall in the world that the job we hold as professors or scientists in institutions, we have to do things a little bit differently. When we see a lot of, misinformation, disinformation, hate campaigns, denialism, you can't just sit around and like you wait for somebody to correct them. You have to do something different, what you have been doing and what you have been trained to do things. But I think part of the reason because it's the system we are operate within that system, and there's no incentive, and then a lot of people don't have that much thick skin when it comes to personal attacks on them because of their views and because of the science and because they present some facts which you don't like. Sitting in your basement and drinking, playing video games, and you think like all the science is crap because you don't understand it, or the climate is not changing because you don't see the temperature is changing every minute or every day. So I think that's maybe part of the reasons, like, and maybe it's a time we need to rethink how these systems work, and like kind of design a little bit a better system to have more public engagement and outreach efforts. Like, for example, some of the universities in Netherlands, they get rid of those impact factors or big journals or things. It's like it means nothing. What it means is like what you're creating as impact in society at large. That's how we see you as a scientist.
Yeah. And the one unique thing about my career was I worked at the interface of politics, academia, policy. The job I had in the government is where all of those things intersect. And, all of those things frustrated me at the time. And the part of that was the science part was, there was science that we desperately needed. And yet scientists have a tendency to just want to study what they want to study and not engage with people that could potentially, make a difference for the environment. And so constantly put in a position of begging researchers to provide me with research that would help me make the argument to conserve ecosystems and species. And sometimes it happened and sometimes it didn't. And when it didn't happen, it wasn't me that suffered. It was the ecosystems and the species that we couldn't justify stopping a project that we knew innately was going to be incredibly harmful.
So is that like you based on your training and experience, do you see like the ecological system as a bigger as a whole and the climate within that, and it's changing and it's driving a whole lot of changes within our ecosystem, or is it like you keep like it climate as something which we are disturbing, our human activities are disturbing, and because of that everything else is driving into a bad shape?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, you really can't look at any one thing in isolation. And that was the other kind of interesting and beneficial part of my career was working in, I worked as a range conservationist, a hydrologist, a watershed specialist, a fisheries biologist, a wildlife biologist, an ecologist. So I did all these different things, and it helped me put things together and understand. We talk about the butterfly effect and how anything affects everything else, and it's so true when you start getting into ecology, and that the complexity of the world that we're trying to manage is so far beyond what we're capable of understanding. And yet, hubris prevents us from admitting that. And so we keep muddling on along, and not a lot of what needs to happen is to let things alone. I mean, the best thing we can do for the environment in terms of climate change right now is stop destroying old growth forests, stop draining wetlands, stop plowing grasslands. All of those things are something that nature's been doing to control carbon for millions of years, and we're undoing the planet's ability to buffer our effects to the
Yeah,
point that uh, emissions are having a direct effect on everything.
yeah, absolutely. And is there like, based on that argument, some people claim that maybe like communities need to stand up and do the things, and some people like government has the responsibility to do it. And how are we going to do it? Like have a bigger realization that what we are doing is not sustainable. It's not, we can't continue the way we are in terms of burning fossil fuel, in terms of our lifestyles, in terms of, destroying the nature or like eating the earth so much. You shared the study, published in Frontiers of some journal, where it's like we already altered 97% of the earth, and only 3% left. That realization, where do we need to do the work, and we're missing it completely. uh Coming from a diverse background like for yourself, is it like the idea of a degrowth, or like is it the idea of like just stop doing whatever, or like how do we navigate this complex system, and we have designed everything around it, how we live as humans? What changes do we need to make?
Well, I don't think it's possible to make the changes that we need to make, which is why, I wrote the book. I mean, we've set, I mean, you explained it very nicely in terms of, we rely on fossil fuels for our everyday life. I mean, if we stopped using fossil fuels today, I mean, lots and lots and lots of people would die. I mean, people point that out all the time as rationale for we've got to keep doing it. So we've set ourselves up for a no-win situation because if we keep doing it going forward with fossil fuels like we are, we're in trouble. But if we stop using fossil fuels, we're in trouble. And so we've painted ourselves into a corner, but we're unwilling to admit it because we of human exceptionalism, that we're somehow going to create a technology that's going to save us, or it goes back to how we view ourselves as a species. And I just don't see us changing who we are as a species. And that's one of the things that I found very, very difficult. And I see even the most ardent environmentalists finding difficult is accepting us for who we are. And it kind of goes back to, romanticizing, and people think that all of a sudden we're going to become this wonderful species in the future that's going to do all good things for the environment. But all you have to see is who we are, is go down to just look at the people around you every day. I mean, that's who we are.
Yeah, I think you're right. Somebody else, I mean, Dr. Paul Dorfman, he also said we are like kind of locked into this system, which is like, and I think Professor Elliott also said like we are all like kind of, that's why we are destined to collapse, because we are locked into the system and there is no perfect way out. And that's why it is going to happen, because yeah, we relied on fossil fuel for hundreds of years, and now we're going to rely on these renewable technologies. And what's going to get come next? What these EV electronic batteries and all that, or how are we going to destroy these batteries? With lithium and all that, and is it not going to destroy the environment? It is absolutely going to protect, destroy the environment. And there is no perfect way or accurate, or like like a greater or a best way to get out, but maybe there are ways to like kind of live life better, or there are other ways to think, other there are other ways to do things, but we are not letting ourselves to do that because we're so maybe locked into that thing, and we're not accepting the change, and we're not seeing things or not observing the things. They're in a very bad shape, and we just keep ignoring them because we're too busy in our own routine daily life.
Yeah, and also we're increasingly disconnected from the environment. I
Yeah.
mean, as a result of more and more people all the time and less environment all the time, I mean, you hit the nail on the head when we started the conversation that a lot of people aren't lucky enough to have uh, worked in nature like I have and spent much of my life in backcountry and wilderness areas. And so they don't, and our environmental baseline, we see the environment as it is today. And the way the other part of our conversation about our time frame and how we frame time, we see it today and can't remember what happened 20, 30 years ago. Or if you weren't alive 20 or 30 years ago, people see what's happening today as normal. And so, but the more you look at what's happened through evolutionary time, I mean, to me, it became crystal clear, what our trajectory is.
Absolutely. So I think one of the questions you may have seen in one of my episodes, I ask everyone is it's like overall when we talk about climate, environment, energy, ecosystem, species, it becomes so broad that it is for somebody like not everybody can put it together like you have done, like there's a lot of different aspects into it and then you combine them and like look at a bigger picture, but not everybody is capable of doing that. For ordinary person is so much information and there is no like concrete or something. That's what people want. I mean, like that's why people don't watch long form videos from YouTube. They go to TikTok because it's just like, quick videos and they don't have, the time, or they don't have, these things to do. They used to have, and now this whole capitalism and all that has ruined everything, especially our relationship with the nature. So what is something, as a society, we should be spending more time talking about climate change or nature or ecosystem, which we are not talking about?
Well, I mean, the one thing that could slow our trajectory is conserving what little we have left. And you mentioned the 97% that's already been impacted by humans, but that 3% is kind of the wall standing up between us and, some really bad things happening. And so the first concept in conservation biology is, first of all, save what you've got and start talking about restoration after you conserve what you've got. And yet, here, even in North America, old growth forests, or for example, are still being cut every single day. And we won't even, the point I made in my book, one of the adages that we had back when I was dealing with grazing is, if there's a lot, we take a lot. And if there's a little, we take it all. And that's exactly what we've done all throughout history. And we're just repeating the same thing now, only instead of, passenger pigeons or stellar sea cow or great auk, now it's water and air. I just saw an article this morning where Tehran figures they have 2 weeks before they run out of water completely.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
but we wait until the last possible second, and then we're surprised that it happened.
True, so true. And that is so bad that like it is happening in our own eyes and we just keep ignoring it. And then when something happens which is irreversible and which you can't do, you can't restore, you can't do restoration anymore, then you start crying or maybe like seeing this is as an inevitable, collapse or a threat or a risk. But until then, you don't. And that's the irony of it. And that's the sad thing, true for the governments, true for the countries, societies, for humans as well. But yeah, I think maybe we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Lyle, once more to come on the show and have some discussions on these topics. Appreciate that so much.